I guess you could say it's somebody who stands up for somebody else. Advocate is a person who takes the information that they have, or the I guess the passion that they have for whatever it is, and represents somebody else that can't represent themselves.
For me, it means knowing about my son's disability, being able to explain it to somebody, knowing what policy and procedure is, knowing how the system works or doesn't work, and understanding what my son needs.
In easy words, an advocate to me is making a smooth pathway for your children to achieve in life. That's from birth on, but in school, most definitely. If you're not there for your children and learn to do it in a manner that's not going to upset someone, your kids are going to make it a lot easier than if you go in angry and accuse.
An advocate in general is someone who stands up for and speaks on behalf of another person, or on behalf of themselves. Actually, it doesn't have to be a person separate from themselves. But
how important is it to be an advocate?
Oh, it's vital. It's absolutely vital.
It's
Well,
extremely important.
You know what? The squeaky wheel gets the oil.
Very.
It's everything. It's something that has been hard for me to do. I took this Partners in Policymaking course on advocacy, and that changed everything, really. For one, it gave me some historical background information on disability rights. It gave me the right words to use. It gave me a sense of confidence that what I wanted, what our family wanted for our lives, was the right thing to do.
Absolutely critical. My son, obviously, he can't advocate for himself. He's only 4.5, but even if he was older, he probably would still need me to do that, and he'll probably need that, pretty much most of his young adult life. I'm really hoping that he can advocate for himself, or I teach him how to advocate for himself later on.
Advocacy helps promote change in a system, helps develop good policy and understanding. And if you don't advocate for something, you're just going along with everybody and saying it's okay.
What are the 3 most important skills that an advocate needs?
Knowledge, the ability to do the research it takes to find the information that you need.
Know your facts, know your audience,
Right.
and have a clear, concise message.
I think emotional regulation is part of it. And what I mean by that is not necessarily keeping yourself cool all the time, but knowing when it's appropriate to bring up the passion.
Cannot go in an advocacy situation hyped up where you're so emotional you start crying and you start carrying on. Not to say you can't do that, but you got to be able to hold it together to talk, and that's important.
You go.
Belief in the person that you're advocating for,
Yeah.
respect for them, for
And
that person and their wants.
And I guess courage.
Yeah.
So, and that takes time, and I'm still working on it. So,
I honestly cannot say that I run into any problems. I can say that mentally I have, because I am not good at being the lead talker. I can be led into something and then I can give you my opinion, but to start it out, I have difficulties with that. I'm a very bashful person. But once I get started, that's hard to believe. And so I think it's, I don't feel from anyone I have run into problems. They're always willing to listen It's walking through that door, opening that door, walking through, and having to talk about things. That is, to me, my biggest problem that has happened.
I think the hardest thing for me has been, it's partially related to my disability, which causes me to have shaky hands and a shaky voice when I get nervous. And because of that, it's hard for me to speak in public. It's hard for me to speak up with confidence at a meeting.
Years ago when we started, Senator Mayhew was our senator. And I knew nothing about the political system or how anything worked. And I said to her, I said, you know, you can just leave all those chuck holes in the streets and just use that money to fund for services. And she says, well, you don't understand. And I said, no, you don't understand. You spend a whole lot of money doing that. There are people just standing around not really doing their work, but we're still paying them. You take all of that money and put it into services. Well, when I found out how the pie is divided, I looked really pretty silly, very foolish, because I was going and asking her for something that could not be done, because I was asking her to take money out of the transportation department to fund a mental health DD, human services program. Those two are completely separate and don't have anything to do with the other.
Favorite success is when my granddaughter wanted to take Spanish, and in the worst way, and was told no, she couldn't do it. And I took it as it was putting them into a spot that they had to work harder, and that she wasn't doing well in her education, so it was a waste of time. And I sat there and thought about it a minute, and then I said, is it time for me to speak? Because I wasn't used to these kind of meetings yet. And they said, yes, you can speak anytime you want to. And I said, why are you treating her this way? And I said, why isn't she given it a chance? Why are our schools not open to, okay, we'll put her in a Spanish class. And if she doesn't do well, we will tell her that she had to meet a certain thing and she didn't meet it, and we'll find her another class. Well, we don't have time to do that. And I says, well, then why are you getting money to teach these kids and No Child Left Behind, and yet you don't have time to try things? She went into Spanish and loved it. And it took extra time, but she loved it, and she only took 1 year, but that's what she needed. She needed to say, see, I can do it. So that was my biggest achievement.
I went to the IEP meeting where I wanted to explain this, and I explained that we are hoping for a modified diploma for Alexa, or possibly an extended one, but either way, when she's in high school, we want Alexa to complete part of her work in the general ed classroom. And in order for that to happen, she needs to begin spending time in the general ed classroom now. And I also want her to learn how to communicate with her fellow students, and she needs to be there to have the opportunity to do that. And I told this whole story, and it seemed to work.
Yeah.
Then they started saying, okay, well, let's figure out how to do that,
When Eric had an IEP, he really wanted to have a letterman's jacket like his brother. Well, we knew he was not going to get it through normal means. And so what we decided to do was, in his IEP, put that he would increase his time or decrease his time, because he was running and swimming, by a percentage. And so each time, and then when he got to the mark, he would get his letter. And that was an advocacy approach through the IEP, and we just shared why it was important and what were the steps that we could go to get that. So we had a plan that we could share. So you need to have thought out what your plan is for what you're advocating for, and not just go in with this idea, even though the idea may be great. If you don't have a plan on how you're going to get there, it's not going to work.
So I knew going into this meeting that they were going to be, at the very most, very skeptical about it, and the very least, completely against it. So basically, I marshaled all of my forces, and I invited as many people as I could think of to come with me. It's the people that handle his issues on a daily basis. The occupational therapists, the folks that work at the folks that work at the ESD obviously were going to show up. The folks that work at Old Mill, it was. They work with them on a regular basis, so they all know what's going on, So I invited all of them that I could, and his county DDS worker, the Developmental Disability Services Coordinator. She came as well. And so I had, besides myself, 5 people sitting at that table who were from I guess you could say, our side of the team. And it took them a while to go through their evaluations and say, oh, no, he's not on the spectrum. No, he's not on the spectrum. No, he's not on the spectrum. And a couple of, oh, he could be on the spectrum. He could be on the spectrum. And then they let my side of the table start talking. And then by the time the meeting was over, one of their folks flipped and it was all over. And they identified him under the autism spectrum educational diagnosis because I probably would not have been able to do that by myself. Having that many people with me at the IFSP meeting was just absolutely not just awesome. It was critical because all of these different people across all of these different settings could say, we know that he needs this diagnosis. So that was a huge success for me, and that we managed to get that educational diagnosis.
How have you taught your children to be self-advocates?
I'm not very good at that. I get bawled out all the time that I'm a grandma and where that is. So we talk about it, and if Danny gets one of those, I'm not going to listen to you anymore, and gets up and walks away, I don't pull her back. But I do work with them, John more.
I remember Eric, like Mike had said earlier, Eric had spoken, different times, and he was always, look to us for assurance. And we would just nod our head and let him know that he was doing okay. And then when he finished, we just said, please don't be worried if you say something that we're not going to agree with. It is okay.
Yeah, it's your story.
You need to have your own story. Mm-hmm. You need to share your own story. Now, I know he shared his story. I know he hasn't had all of his facts right. But, if they need all of those facts right, then they'll come and ask us.
Next year, I'm hoping to do a little presentation using her talker, explaining what she likes about this class or this situation. And, last year I just had her at the meeting, at the IEP meeting, to make sure that everyone at the table remembered that this was this child specifically that we were talking about, and that they shouldn't use anything, they shouldn't say anything that they didn't want her to hear. And, I think that was the very first step, but letting her use her communication methods will be the next step. So,
how many people meet with you or contact you in a day?
Well, it depends on the day, but we have a lot of people. We have phone calls, we have meetings. There, the people that testify in front of committees, we get dozens of emails every day. Some days we get hundreds of emails, depending on what the issue is. And then I go home and get contacted by people at church and the grocery store and the gas station and the restaurant and the doctor's office and pretty much any place I go. But I would say in a given week, there are probably quality interactions with several dozen people.
What can someone do to stand out? If they're an advocate and they want to meet with you and advocate about something, what can they do?
I think what helps me most are effective advocates that are able to come and do 2 things. First, really express what the problem is and tell a real story about how it impacts a real person. And if that person can then have a direct ask, a specific way that I can help them, a specific way that I can help to change a law or a policy to make the system work better for people. So I think the advocates that stand out for me are those that that are articulate, that are organized, that have a clear vision of what they're trying to accomplish, but that also are really focused on what it means for real people. It has to be more than the words on paper. It needs to actually make somebody's life better. And there are some advocates that do a phenomenal job of doing that. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I think those advocates that are able to kind of provide some structure, able to provide some detail and information, but really allow the story to be told by the people that it impacts, that always stands out to me. A really great example of an advocate that I heard recently. I was sitting in a Human Services Committee hearing, and we heard from foster youth about their experiences in foster care. And there was a young man who was 21. He had recently graduated from foster care, and he was able to talk about some of the things that worked well for him in foster care, but he was also very honest and very candid about what didn't work. And his story, I can still picture his face right now, even though I only heard him that day, because he really told his story from his heart, and he had very concrete suggestions of what we could do to improve foster care for young people.
What advice do you have for advocates?
Again, I think being organized and being clear about what it is that you're advocating for. And I mean, sometimes advocates are advocating for a cause over a long period of time. In that case, I think it's important to know what your values are, so that anytime, if you're in a legislative session, for instance, and you're trying to figure out how you're going to weigh in on a bill, knowing what the values of your movement are. You know, for me, I come out of the disability movement, and the values that I like to focus on are self-determination and equality and individual choice. And so whenever I weigh an issue here, I want to weigh it against those three things. When I have advocates come to me to talk to me about different bills, I'll often ask them about what are your values, or aside from this bill or this policy, what is your vision for how this policy would work in the world, or how would it impact this group of people, and how do you decide if it's a helpful policy or a detrimental policy? So I think really knowing what your values are. I think it's important to be assertive and be willing to push hard and ask difficult questions and be a little bit impatient. There's a time at which you need those people that are pushing in order to break the resistance and move things forward. But it also requires a certain degree of patience. Sometimes people just aren't going to agree, and you have to be willing to compromise. And that again goes back to what are those base values? How can you forward the value, get closer to that value, and know where that place is that you can make the compromise?
So you've met with a lot of advocates.
Mm-hmm.
You must have a story of the worst advocate, someone who came to you with a cause they were passionate about, but they did it the exact wrong way.
I think, and everybody has ways that they do things in different styles, and I think as a legislator, different legislators here will respond to people in different ways. So that's one key thing. You need to know who you're talking to as an advocate to know what's going to be important to them, because what's important to me and what moves me is going to be different than what moves someone else. But for me, I think those that have been the least effective are those that are absolutely unwilling to compromise, where the belief is that anybody that disagrees with that advocate's position is wrong or part of some conspiracy or just plain stupid. That's not particularly helpful. I think it's important for advocates to be willing to listen. It's hard if somebody comes in and they're advocating for something, and we make recommendations about how to make their idea better or how they might massage the message. An unwillingness to change that isn't particularly effective. I think the other thing that's not effective is burning bridges. So if someone is not successful in changing my mind or changing a colleague's mind, saying that you want to put a curse upon their family is probably not the best way to move forward. I received an email once that started with, "You probably don't even read emails from the great unwashed like me. You probably have people that do that for you." I read all my emails, and kind of starting out the relationship with an insult is probably also not the best way to go.